In this video, we're going to be looking at the theory of oligopoly specified in the EdExcel syllabus, which is game theory. Now, this is going to be quite a long video, so there'll be various pauses that I'll be suggesting at points in it. Now, game theory attempts to show how oligopolies, or more strictly duopolies, make their decisions. And when you go through game theory, you might get an equilibrium outcome, or you might not. In other words, you can't really know how an oligopoly is going to behave. It's a fairly simplistic theory. We assume there's only two firms, there's only two possible decisions that they could make, and there are only two possible known outcomes. That isn't a problem. Most economic theories simplify. For example, Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage assumes that there's only two countries in the world and they're only producing two goods. Now, despite being quite simplistic, you can show from there why, say, the United Kingdom specialises on services and why China specialises in manufactures. So what is the prisoner's dilemma? Well, if you watch any of the soaps, you'll see people like Phil Mitchell saying, "Oh, I'd never squealed the old bill." And of course, because we all call the police the old bill these days, don't we? And the reason for that is that in EastEnders, the police say, "You better cooperate with us, Mr. Mitchell, or things will be tough." But what they don't do is spell out the actual implications of cooperating with the police or not cooperating with the police. And that is what game theory does. And that is why in practice, the police are able to get quite a few more confessions than EastEnders would suggest that they would. So in this scenario, you and a friend have been out committing a crime and you've been caught. Now, the police aren't sure, but they think that you and your friend are responsible for doing other crimes in the area. So what they do is they separate you. They put you in different rooms and they'll be interrogating you in different rooms at the same time. Now, for the crime you've done, you are going to get 2 years in prison. But they say to you, look, if you cooperate with us, then we're going to say to the court how nice you've been, and we're going to see if we can get that sentence reduced to 1 year. Now, unfortunately, if both you and your friend confess to doing all these crimes, then unfortunately, because you've done a whole load of crimes, you're both going to finish up with 4 years. However, if you decide to remain silent and your friend points the finger at you, then you are going to get 8 years and he is going to get off with only 1. So we're going to work through the possible outcomes. If your friend remains silent and you confess, you are going to get 1 year. If you both remain silent, well, you're still going to be done for that crime that you've been caught for, and you're both going to get 2 years. So if your friend remains silent, what's it best for you to do? Get 1 year in prison or 2 years in prison? No brainer. If your friend remains silent, it's better for you to confess. So what if your friend blabs? Well, if your friend blabs and you blab, you're both going to get 4 years because you've got this whole load of crimes that you've been done for. However, if your friend confesses and you remain silent, then you are going to get 8 years in prison. So if your friend confesses and you confess, you'll get 4 years in prison. If your friend confesses and you remain silent, you'll get 8 years in prison. Well, what would you rather have? You'd rather have 4 years in prison. So it's better for you to confess if your friend confesses. So if your friend remains silent, it's better for you to confess. If your friend confesses, it's better for you to confess. So more often than not, you are going to confess, and so is the other prisoner, your friend, because they are faced with exactly the same situation as you. So you are probably going to confess. So we have an equilibrium. We know what is going to happen, and that is called a strong Nash equilibrium. Strong because it's confess or confess. Nash because he's the bloke who thought up the theory. And there he is on the bottom left. That's John Nash. He was a mathematician. And in the middle, you've got Russell Crowe, who played John Nash in the film A Beautiful Mind. And on the right-hand side, you've got Russell Crowe in Gladiator, because I like Gladiator. Now, you'll note this does not say that you will always confess. but you are more likely to confess than not, particularly if the way that the police do it is they'll sort of come in and they'll give you knowing looks as if your friend has confessed, and they do that to make you feel a little bit unstable. And you'll see that the competition authorities do exactly the same when they're trying to deal with collusion on another video. Now, there are no diagrams in game theory, but there is a matrix. And the matrix basically looks at the two options available to you and the two options available to your friend. And all we're interested in is the matrix that faces you. So as you can see there, if you both confess, then you are going to finish up with 4 years. Whereas if your friend confesses and you remain silent, you are going to finish up with 8 years. If you shop your friend and they remain silent, you are going to finish up with 1 year. Whereas if you both remain silent, then you are going to finish up with 2 years. So we analyse it row by row, looking at what your friend is going to do. Now, in this particular case, a lower figure is best because you want to spend fewer years in prison. So if your friend confesses, 4 is less than 8. So therefore, you are going to confess. And if your friend remains silent, then and you confess, well, 1 year is better than 2 years, so you are going to confess. So we've written the word confess twice. That makes it strong, and that makes it a strong Nash equilibrium to confess. And because you are both facing the same dilemma, that top left cell on the matrix is where you're going to finish up. But you'd rather be on that bottom right cell if you both remain quiet. But unfortunately, an equilibrium is an equilibrium, and you're not going to get there. So we've looked at game theory. This could be a good place to pause. And if you haven't already looked up golden balls, can I strongly suggest that you pause it here and look up golden balls, Sarah versus Stephen. Do that on Google, look for the YouTube or look for the Facebook reference. You might find you might not be able to get it because the company that produces golden balls has been trying to take this down. But it's a very good video to look at, and it shows prisoner's dilemma and game theory pretty much perfectly. It's also something that I'm going to be looking at on the next chunk of the video. So the golden balls final is classic game theory. There are 2 players and they have 2 options to share or to steal, and there are 2 possible outcomes. Now in this case, they were playing for roughly £100,000, and if they both hold up the share ball, then they'll both share that £100,000 and get £50,000 each. If on the other hand you steal and they share, then you will steal the whole lot and get 100,000. So what are you more likely to do? What do you want to do? Do you want to earn 100,000 by stealing or 50,000 by sharing? Well, you'd rather get the 100,000. So you would be playing steal if they choose to share. If they steal and you share, then you get nothing. And if you both steal, then you get nothing. So what would you rather get, nothing or nothing? You're indifferent as to whether you get nothing or nothing. So if they share, it's better for you to steal. If they steal, you're not bothered either way. So if you look at the outcomes on the right hand side, you'll see the word share never appears. So we do have a Nash equilibrium. But it's a weak Nash equilibrium because it doesn't say steal in both of the boxes. Now the big difference between classic prisoner's dilemma and golden balls, and you'll see this with other examples as well, is in classic prisoner's dilemma, the prisoners can't speak to each other. Whereas in golden balls, they have that 30 seconds of human contact where they can persuade them to change their mind or to put up a certain ball or whatever. There are some really good videos on golden balls, some really weird outcomes there. But that's going to be the main difference between classic prisoner's dilemma and golden balls. And again, you might want to pause at this point because we've just done 2 different matrices. Well, so far we've had a strong Nash equilibrium, and a weak Nash equilibrium. Now let's look at this particular scenario. We're interested in firm A, and this is a typical sort of question that you might get as to what sort of pricing strategy a firm should engage in using game theory. Well, if firm B goes for a low price, then firm A will make a profit of £5 million if they also go for a low price. But if they go for a high price on this matrix, they might get £10 million. So if firm B goes low, you would rather go high and earn £10 million. But if firm B goes high and you go low, you are going to make £8 million profit. And if you both go high, then you are going to make £6 million profit. So if they go high, what would you rather have? £8 million or £6 million? Well, you'd rather have £8 million. So you would therefore, under those circumstances, go low. So if they go low, you go high. If they go high, you go low. So we don't really know what you are going to do. So we don't have a dominant strategy. Therefore, there is no Nash equilibrium. Quite a lot to think about there. So again, you might want to take a pause. So what sort of questions might come up? Well, typically it will say evaluate using game theory, and it will be a big mark question. It will be a 12 or a 15er. So it could be evaluate using game theory pricing strategies that say Tesco, Firm X could undertake to increase their profit or market share. And typically you'll be looking at perhaps do they set a high price or a low price? Do they engage in collusive pricing or not? Do they engage in predatory pricing or not? Or alternatively, it could be looking at non-pricing strategies like loyalty cards or promotion or brand building, or should they do customer service like Waitrose do, or should they try to differentiate their product like Apple do? Or it might be a question based on what the competition authorities could do to deal with suspected collusive behaviour. So how do we answer that? Well, first of all, we build a simple matrix for firm A that results in an equilibrium. Do not try to set up a non-Nash. You then talk through in a paragraph what that matrix is saying, and you must clearly state what the equilibrium is. You could perhaps show this on the matrix like I do, but say therefore firm X is going to set a low price, or it's going to engage in predatory pricing or collusive pricing or whatever. The next words are really important. You must state if firm B, Sainsbury's, is facing the same situation, it would come to the same conclusion. If you don't do that, then you would need to state Sainsbury's condition on the matrix as well. So you would have 8 numbers in the matrix. That gets quite complex. So try to avoid that with those magic words. And then you would do any further analysis or evaluation from there. For example, you might be looking at, if say you're setting a low price, you might say, well, it depends upon the price elasticity of demand for the product. It might depend upon how the other firm responds or whatever. So your question could be, evaluate pricing strategies Tesco could pursue to increase profits. So basically the strategies that you could be suggesting could be either they engage in a price war or they don't engage in a price war. You'll notice the numbers I'm going to use are exactly the same as I put in on my original prisoner's dilemma matrix. So if Asda don't go for a price war and you don't go for a price war, you're both going to finish up, you're going to finish up with £4 million profit. But if they choose not to go for a price war and you go for a price war, you're going to do pretty well from that. So you're going to make an £8 million profit. So under those circumstances, do you want to make £4 million or do you want to make £8 million? You want to make £8 million. So you're going to go for a price war. But if they go for a price war and you don't, they are going to take your customers and you're going to finish up with only £1 million profit. Whereas if you both decide to go for a price war, you're going to finish up with £2 million because you're going to be busy scrapping with them and it's going to be eating away at your profits. So what would you rather have? 1 million profit or 2 million profit? You'd rather pocket the 2 million, thank you very much. So you are going to be going for a price war. If Asda go for a price war, you're going to be retaliating. So if Asda go for no war, it's better for you to go for a war. And if Asda go to war, it's better for you to retaliate. So you are going to go to war more often than not. So we have a strong Nash equilibrium, which would be a price war. But just like with prisoner's dilemma, wouldn't it be better for you to finish up on that top left cell and make 4 million profit rather than the bottom right and make 2 million profit? So that might lead to the next part of your analysis by saying, well, maybe why don't we get together with ASDA and avoid a price war? So we could be colluding with ASDA. Except, of course, that collusion is illegal, as we'll cover on another video, and subject to pretty massive fines if found out. What's more, it's likely to break down because a Nash equilibrium is a Nash equilibrium. The firm's going to be tempted to engage in a price war because 8 million profit is better than 4 million profit, and if one firm starts a price war, then the other firm is likely to counter it, and so you're both going to finish up on that bottom right again because it is an equilibrium. Now you can use game theory on all sorts of different aspects of the economic spec. So for example, if we look at training, which is a market failure, everybody wants trained workers. Trained workers are good. They're good from a micro perspective because they increase the productivity of a company, the quality of what that company is producing, and from a macro perspective, it increases GDP and pushes the aggregate supply curve right. However, for a firm, training workers is expensive. What they might prefer to do is wait for other firms to train up their workers and then attract them with decent pay packages, which will be cheaper than training those workers up yourself. And you'll notice I've used exactly the same matrix. So if ASDA train and we train, we're going to get 4 million. If ASDA train but we nick ASDA's workers, we're going to finish up with 8 million. So we're going to want to recruit from ASDA. Similarly, if ASDA recruit and we train, we're going to finish up with only 1 million profit because it's expensive to train up work. Whereas if ASDA recruit and you recruit, you're going to finish up with 2 million. So either way, you are better off recruiting, which is why left to itself, the free market tends to under-train workers. Because every firm is basically thinking the same thing. So how does the government deal with that? Well, they tend to subsidise things like training, particularly in things like IT, because they are trying to change the numbers inside the box. If we take an example from theme 4, global warming, we all know that global warming isn't good. In 2006, the Stern report said we need to spend 1% of world GDP now. It's about $800 billion. Because if we don't, then further down the line, we're going to be facing bills of 5 to 20 times that. However, that's an awful lot of money to spend. And from an individual country's perspective, if they sit back and do nothing and let everyone else do it, then they're still going to get the benefit because the world's climate won't get that much worse if everyone else is dealing with global warming seriously. So there are two things that we can do. We can either pay lip service to global warming, saying the right thing but actually doing nothing, or we can be serious about fighting it. If everyone pays lip service to it, if the rest of the world pays lip service and we pay lip service as well, it's not going to be good for us. We're going to finish up $4 trillion down. But if we're the only ones fighting global warming, we're going to finish up spending big time on it, and we're going to finish up $8 trillion down. So therefore, it's going to be better for us to just pay lip service to it. But if everyone else takes it seriously and we don't, then the world will get better. We're still going to be worse than we were to start with, but we're only going to be losing $1 trillion. Whereas if everyone takes it seriously, we're going to finish up losing $2 trillion. So again, it's better for us to pay lip service to it. So we have a Nash equilibrium, it's strong, and basically the decision is that we're going to let everyone else do it and we're going to do nothing about it. And again, there'll be lots of countries who are going to be tempted to do that. So by a multinational, a multilateral agreement like the Paris Accord, that's where countries all agree to do something. And you'll notice that President Trump pulled out of the multinational Paris Agreement because he basically said that he was stitching up America. It wasn't. But he was basically following this matrix. If we look at the Make Poverty History campaign, we get a similar thing. Obviously, if people are starving because they're poor, that's not going to be good for the developing world, but it's also not going to be that good for the developed world, because a strong developing world economy is going to benefit the developed economies as well, because it means that they're going to be richer, they're going to be buying more of your exports. However, if you are spending money on aiding these poor countries, well, that could be used instead, opportunity cost, to develop the domestic economy. And typically you'll see papers like the Daily Mail and the Sun saying, well, what about our homeless? We're giving all this money abroad. Shouldn't we be helping our own people? Now, the point is that if other countries aid, but we don't, you're still going to benefit as they get richer. So there is going to be a strong Nash equilibrium to not aid. Now, in 2005, when this Make Poverty History campaign started, the G8 countries got together at Gleneagles in Scotland, and they promised to provide $80 billion of development funds, 0.7% of GDP, in development aid. By 2015, only 30 billion of that 50 billion had actually been delivered, and only one country, the UK, actually met that target of 0.7% of GDP being given to aid. So again, what the countries were doing, even though in this case it was a multilateral agreement, is they were actually moving towards that Nash equilibrium of basically paying lip service to making poverty history, which is why poverty isn't history. Sticking with theme 4, tariffs. Most people regard free trade as a good thing. Go through your Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage. However, tariffs often benefit the domestic economy, at least in the short term, because it means that you're going to be preserving jobs. It's a lot easier if you're running for election to say, look, we are going to impose tariffs so that manufacturers won't suffer. A lot more difficult to try to explain the theory of comparative advantage. Believe you me, I've tried. However, if you impose tariffs, then you hit free trade, and so you lose all the benefits from the theory of comparative advantage. Now, in the Great Depression, or after the Great Depression, countries individually tried to protect their economy by erecting tariff barriers. There were tariff wars between countries, and that aided the depression. So it was actually not good in the long run for countries to pursue the Nash equilibrium of imposing tariffs. And again, what's President Trump's favorite weapon when dealing with countries? It's tariffs, because it looks good inside the country. We go to labour markets. During strikes, unions often put up picket lines. Well, the point about that is that strikes are only likely to succeed if the turnout is high, if a lot of people are striking. But if you go on strike, you lose your pay. And if everyone else strikes but you don't, then you are still going to benefit, say, from the higher pay that a strike might just get you. So there's a Nash equilibrium to not strike. So that's why you have a picket line, because you're trying to change the individual decision into a collective decision. You're trying to make them feel socially awkward by crossing picket lines. Another theme 4 question. Why during the Great Depression did countries try to devalue their currencies? Well, the answer is whoopee-deck. Weak pound, imports dearer, exports cheaper. So if you devalue your currency or depreciate your currency, that makes your exports cheaper. Other people are going to buy your exports, and that is going to boost your economy. Now, the trouble is if everyone devalues their exchange rate, well, nobody is devalued, because the exchange rate is the value of one currency against another. But what you have done is disrupted the markets with all these devaluations. You're creating uncertainty, and so that tends to hit trade. So what was happening was that due to both tariffs and devaluations, trade was badly hit, and it took a long time for economies to recover from that Great Depression. Finally, and this is going to be on another video, the competition authorities use game theory. Again, they use classic prisoner's dilemma to try to get firms to admit when they are colluding. Well, we spent quite a long time on game theory, And I think I've just about said all that I want to say. Thank you.